Greetings, friends. Today I want to talk with you about what could make the so-called Russian Federation stop or at least pause the Russian-Ukrainian war by the end of this year, although that's not certain. We will be talking about the decline of the Russian economy, which has become increasingly noticeable lately. But first I have to say that over the past day the Russians have massively attacked Kharkiv with drones, missiles and aerial bombs, striking residential areas. Dnipro and the Dnipropetrovsk region were also under heavy Russian attacks. And the day before, the Russians carried out a massive combined attack against all of Ukraine, and the President of the United States, Trump, essentially justified this attack with his statement that Ukrainians supposedly gave a reason themselves.
They gave Putin a reason to act and bomb them to hell last night. That's what I didn't like. When I saw that, I said, that's it. Now there will be a strike.
The security service of Ukraine was striking at Russian strategic aviation because the Russians were using it to launch missile attacks on Ukrainian territory. It was Ukraine that was responding to Russian attacks. And in the end, what did Ukraine do when the Russians killed children in Kryvyi Rih? What did Ukraine do when the so-called Russian Federation launched its full-scale invasion? Did it bomb that FSB booth that was shown right before the full-scale invasion? Donald Trump's statement is very dangerous, because not only does he shift responsibility from the aggressor to the victim, but he also justifies Russian terrorist attacks. And so that the Russians receive inevitable punishment so that our troops can avenge the terror, donate right now to current Rus resource.
These aren't just drones, this is a strike the enemy doesn't expect. This help is more than just equipment. It's a demonstration of our strength. It's a daily contribution to victory.
All the payment details, as always, are in the description of this video. Join in even with small donations, because if everyone subscribed to my channel donates just 1 hryvnia a day, we could buy, just think about it, 4,500 additional FPVs. So join in, and if for some reason you still haven't subscribed to my channel, though I can't imagine why, go ahead and subscribe, and let's talk about the Russian economy.
Besides, our economy is currently in such a precarious state. Indeed, a very dangerous state.
The economy is entering a very unstable period.
Dominoes, one after another, could start to fall.
It will be tough for everyone, regardless of the industry.
That's a good indicator.
It's no secret at all that the Russian economy is going through far from its best times. Vladimir Putin is completely confused about what state it's in. One moment he says it's in excellent shape, and then he complains about high inflation.
The Russian economy was growing at an accelerated pace. One of the main problems of today's Russian economy is high inflation.
By the end of this year, the Russian economy may face significant accelerated stagnation, but let's take it step by step. The head of Russia's central bank describes the state of the Russian economy as a soft landing.
The economy is rather following a soft landing trajectory without sharp fluctuations.
One could also use such terms as negative growth of the Russian economy or negative progress. Russians are complaining that entire industries are beginning to decline.
At present, there are at least 2 sectoral crises being observed: in agricultural machinery manufacturing and coal mining.
Since the beginning of this year, freight rail transport in Russia has started to decline significantly. Literally thousands of rail cars are standing empty. Production of agricultural machinery has also almost come to a halt, as manufacturers cannot afford expensive loans. The coal industry is a separate topic. Russian coal production for export is approaching zero because no one wants to buy Russian coal due to sanctions. It can be said that overall there is a significant decline in business activity in the so-called Russia, and this of course negatively affects its economy. And inflation has also started to rise more actively there.
And with high inflation, there are no affordable interest rates. Even if you lower the key rate, real market rates will remain high. Essentially, in the end, inflation, it's inflation that eats away at the economy's potential.
And inflation is rising. It's already 10.28.
And right now we're only talking about the figures since the beginning of this year, but compared to last year, it's probably better not to describe the Russian economy in polite terms. There's another very problematic sector for the Russian economy. Deputy Prime Minister Kusnulin is sounding the alarm, because in just 1 year, not a single new residential building may be constructed or put into operation in so-called Russia.
If this trend continues and there are no sources of funding, well, the housing market could start to collapse with irreversible consequences.
I would like to emphasize, these statements are not just being made by some economic experts or ordinary Russians. They are being made by top Russian officials, the head of the central bank, and even a deputy prime minister. Well, according to American General Cavoli, who studies the state of affairs in the so-called Russian Federation very thoroughly, its economy has a significant imbalance between the civilian and military sectors.
It has an enormous oversized defense sector, but a weak civilian sector. And this defense sector, as you know, Chairman, is not a productive center. It is not a productive economy for the nation. It is productive for waging war. But apart from that, it has essentially absorbed everything else. It seems that it will be very difficult to eliminate such an imbalance.
However, even the defense industrial production complex in the so-called Russian Federation is experiencing some problems.
If you look at the sectors, the picture is very, very discouraging. Even the military industrial production is struggling to breathe. It is already at its limit.
One can also observe an interesting paradox. The so-called Russian Federation is a gas station country. It has a lot of energy resources, yet this year utility tariffs for Russians are set to increase by a little over 11%. And in certain regions of the so-called Russia, they are being forced to cut payments for signing contracts to fight against Ukraine because there isn't enough money.
In other words, the budget isn't limitless. But I believe that one can and should defend the motherland not only for money. I really hope that the flow of patriotic volunteers won't dry up after the payments are reduced.
There are many factors that can be named as to why the Russian economy is currently in such a state. The key one is the Russian-Ukrainian war. But to be specific, the main reasons for the decline of the Russian economy are the sanctions, as well as the drop in oil prices.
Today, in our budget, the price was 69.7, with the cutoff price at 60. Now the price is much lower.
Just in the month of May, the so-called Russian Federation received 50% less income from oil sales. The reason for this was that OPEC had previously raised the oil production limits. As a result, prices started to fall, and recently OPEC Plus decided to further increase the production limits. Trump also played a role. He may not have intended to, but he dealt a blow to the Russian economy with his tariffs because the world began to anticipate a recession. And that means that demand for oil began to fall, and accordingly, so did prices. If this trend continues, then by the end of this year, the so-called Russian Federation will be facing major economic problems.
I believe we still have a margin of safety until the end of the year.
The situation could significantly worsen by the end of this year.
The so-called Russian Federation is a colossus with feet of clay. It may appear very stable and very confident, but then it could collapse at any moment. And the United States of America could push it to collapse with a single blow by imposing secondary sanctions on Russian oil.
If I genuinely believe that Russia is absolutely not going to negotiate or cease the ongoing bloodshed, then yes, I would certainly use this if it becomes absolutely necessary. And they really do give me this opportunity.
But the American president is defending so-called Russia until the very end. Moreover, he wants to prevent Congress from passing a bill on tough sanctions and wants them to soften the wording. So there's no point in hoping for Trump, at least for now. So what is the Russians' plan? Right now, they are not planning to end the Russian-Ukrainian war. They have launched their summer offensive campaign, and they expect it to be successful for them. And then, closer to the end of the year, perhaps the Russians will actually agree to real, not fake negotiations. In other words, Vladimir Putin wants to seize as much Ukrainian territory as possible before a significant collapse of the Russian economy occurs, and then come out and say, well, that's it, now we're definitely ready for a ceasefire. But until that moment, they will continue their offensive. And the Russian occupiers must be stopped with drones.
After all, they'll have to break through the so-called drone line through hundreds of thousands of drones.
The destruction of Russian infantry, by the way, also creates a significant burden on the Russian economy because for the eliminated occupiers, not for all of them, but still compensation payments have to be made. That's why we, without relying on Trump or anyone else, must now maximize the supply of kamikaze drones to the Ukrainian military. All the more so because the Russians, both in the Kostiantynivka direction and in the Sumy direction, are carrying out assaults mainly using only infantry. And this means that the consumption of drones is increasing.
During the offensive, a lot of our guys are dying. I've never done this before, but for the third day in a row now, I'm transporting body bags for the Cargo 200.
I want to thank you for constantly, daily donating to Rosoris. This is extremely important because it allows us to deliver new drones to the front every single day. And thanks to you, our military has received another 360 new FPV drones. Glory to the heroes. Friends, I have to repeat what I have already said many times. I am convinced that we will still live to see the time when the so-called Russia will fall apart. But we must not hope that this will happen on its own. We have to bring this day closer and for that continue to help Ukraine's security and defense forces as much as possible.